Okay, of all the lessons in this optimizing your profile, this is the one you're going to want to pay the most amount of attention to because it directly affects your wallet. And what I mean by that is, of course, how to price your services. Now, look, every freelancer I've ever talked to has done the same thing. Undercharge for their services when they first get started, only to raise them up significantly later. It is a common thing that we do, and it's frustrating because you think that if I lower my price, I should have lots of people coming to me, but the reality is that that's rarely the case. And if you do have people paying you a much lower rate than you normally should charge, you'll never be able to get those people to pay you more. So I want to talk about pricing strategies. I want to go through and give you some real guidelines on how to think about the pricing of your services. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it. So the very first thing that I always like to say is clients on Upwork can and will pay more for work. Do not let whatever budget they say they have or whatever hourly rate they put down be the sole determinant whether you want to communicate or send a proposal to them. This is absolutely, I've seen this time and time again. Clients can and will pay more. And this is what I tell everyone. The reason they will pay more is because clients don't know how much it costs you to do the work. That's why you have to send them proposals. That's why you have to make a really awesome profile. That's why you have to do a little bit more so that you can have those conversations with clients because they don't know what it costs you to get the work done. Okay, so also, when you want to maximize your earnings, if you really come down to what should you price your services, how much you should charge a client, it's really actually kind of simple. Does the value you provide to the client for the job you're doing cost less than the value they receive from you? So for example, if I have something that I want you to do and it's going to make me like $1,000, well, I have a lot of latitude in how much I pay you because I know that if you give it to me for less than $1,000, I can make money from it. So as long as your value is less than the value they receive, you can maximize the amount of money that you're charging. All right. The other thing to keep in mind is that context matters. So ask questions. And we're going to spend some time on this because the context of the situation the client is in really will determine how much they can afford to spend with you. So your goal is the more you understand about their needs, the easier it is to price in value so you can maximize your earnings. All right. So let me give you kind of an illustration. If you watch the first module on client needs, I talked about there's really only 4 types of projects: simple, urgent, ongoing, complex, where depending on which quadrant you're in is how much you can charge for those particular services. So let's use as an example that your starting point is $40 an hour. Okay, that's for simple tasks. That's for things that you know you can get done in a reasonable period of time. Maybe it's an hour, maybe it's 5 hours, but they're really well defined as far as what is needed, the time period. It's what we call something simple to get done. However, if a client needs your work immediately, meaning you have to drop everything out there that you have to get on this right now because they have a deadline, they need it done, then you should charge more for that because the urgency factor, it means that you need to raise your rate up, if no other reason, because you have to put other work aside to go focus on them. So it's not uncommon to see people charge a premium. I'll give you a great case study. Daniel one time got a project on Upwork and the budget was $2,500 and they needed it turned around in a week. Because of the type of work it was and the urgency, he ended up charging $10,000. You'll see it on his profile. In other words, they had a budget of $2,500, but the urgency was such that they had to spend more because we were the only people available to provide that work to them. Now, contrast that to a long-term strategy where you're probably doing hourly work for, let's say, a month or 2 months or 3 months, where it's pretty much ongoing. It's one of those situations where you're kind of like an employee, but you're not. Obviously, you'll probably charge a little bit more for a guaranteed set of hours. And then finally, in the complex button, the upper right quadrant, if it's a complex problem, then you should be charging more for it. So I'll give you an example. If you're doing email, right, and the client says, okay, here's a design for an email. We want you to create up this email in HTML and give us back that file so we can give it to our expert on Klaviyo, let's say. Well, that's a very straightforward project. They're giving you the design. You just have to code it into HTML, make sure it can work with email systems, and you just give it to them back. But if the client says, wait a minute, I want you to not only design this, but I also need you to go put it onto Klaviyo, and I need you to help set up Klaviyo. Well, there's a different set of skills needed, right? Not just designing the email, but also understanding how Klaviyo works. That's a complex project. Hence, you should charge a little bit more than your normal hourly rate. So just because you say you're $40 an hour doesn't necessarily mean that you'll actually do that work for $40 an hour based on the conditions or the context of what the client needs done. Okay. So as a summary, the pricing factors that increase or decrease your hourly rate can really be broken down in very simply. Do they need something right now? In other words, is time a factor? Is that something that they're willing to pay a premium for? And are higher skill sets needed for this particular job? In other words, if it's more complex where you're having to use different skills, you can definitely and should ask for more money. And the other thing, I didn't really talk about this before, is that, a lot of you, especially in the technical space, may already have a lot of projects 90% done, that they're ready to go in the can. Like, in other words, you've probably taken some prior work and put them together, maybe a framework, and all you have to do is tweak that framework to deliver to the client. Well, of course they should pay more for it. Why? Because you're really close to giving them the solution. And even though it may only take you an hour to finish that 10%, the client shouldn't just pay you for an hour. They should pay you for the solution that you're providing. Now, factors that decrease your hourly rate, long-term commitment. In other words, if I come to you and say, look, I'm going to guarantee you 100 hours worth of work, I want a discount off your hourly rate, that is to be expected, and you should be prepared to give it to them. And then, of course, the other thing that we all have faced, all of us have done it, if you really need the work, you're going to lower your price. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons not to, but psychologically, we feel like if we take our normal rate and put it at a cheaper discount, maybe it will lead to more traffic to us. Understandable, and often we will make that compromise, especially in the beginning, but let's not do that ongoing. All right. So with all these factors aside, let me go ahead and advance our slide here. Okay, some general rules. So based on everything we said, what are some rules that we should really be cognitive of pricing? Number one, never discount your work on the promise of future work. I know you may want to discount it and say, oh, we have lots of work for you. Just do this one on the cheap. Do not do it. Because psychologically, if you underprice your work, let's say you normally charge $40 an hour and you give it to them for $20 an hour, a huge discount, right? They will always think of you as the $20 an hour guy or gal. They will not come back and say, well, he's normally 40%. They just don't. So never discount your work. If they promise you, oh, we'll give you a lot more work in the future, it's a common tactic. No, you are worth what you are worth. Charge it. And if they can't meet it, forget about it. And if future work comes up, then you can talk about that future work. So just don't discount yourself. Okay. The next rule to follow, let me go ahead and get my mouse over here, is if you do discount your rate, make sure the client acknowledges the discount. You remember when I said if you went from 40 to 20, you can never really take them up again? That's absolutely true. The only exception to that is when the client understands, acknowledges, I am giving you a discount because of X, and you acknowledge that. Do you understand that? Yes, I understand. You're normal. If you do anything else with me in the future, it will be at this higher rate. I'm just giving you a discount now for whatever reason that I'm providing to you. It's so important to have that. Generally, don't discount on the promise of future work ever. But if you are going to discount, make sure they understand, okay, you're giving me a deal for some sort of trade-off, and we'll talk about those in a little bit. All right, another rule. And I said this repeatedly, clients always have more money to spend than what they state on Upwork. So let me explain why. A lot of times Upwork will provide suggestions for pricing. Normally you should pay like $5 an hour. And you're like, oh, okay, I don't know any better. Maybe it's $5 an hour sounds good. Other times they're just putting a placeholder in. They're just putting something out there to kind of filter out. Like, I need a 50-page website for $100. it's not going to cost 100. They don't think it's going to cost 100. They're just putting it as a placeholder. They're trying to see whom they can get out there. I've seen projects on Upwork for $1 million. I kid you not. In fact, I can show 3 examples of $1 million projects. They're not paying $1 million. They just did it because they wanted lots of activity. So always realize they have more money to spend. Okay. Now, one of the key strategies around your pricing is that you want and should be looking for opportunities to do complex jobs, because complex jobs are where the money are. And I will tell you, especially if you're a technical person and you're doing something that is very unique, you want it to be a complex job. It will take a little bit more time usually, a lot more skill sets, but they will pay for it because it's complex. It is by its nature more expensive to get done. So when you're looking at, all of the different types of categories of jobs out there, you're going to be saying, okay, how can I take a simple job and go to and see if it's really a complex job? How can I take an ongoing job and make it a complex project? How can I take an urgent job and move it into a complex project? And the reason is because even an urgent job like the one I mentioned before actually led to a lot more work, because what they immediately needed was only part of the solution. They had a lot more things they needed after the fact, and which led to a more complex job. So your goal, if you want to really maximize your earning, get to a complex job. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by asking the client questions. Remember what I said, that context matters? Absolutely. When you send a proposal out, when you get a client to invite you to a project, your sole goal is to message them, get on a Zoom call. Why? Because you need to be asking questions to understand context. Because whatever they put in that job description, there is a lot more that they didn't include, and your goal is to find out what that is. So if you can determine, is it a complex project? Is it an urgent project? So for example, here's just a very short list of questions. When do you need this by? That's an urgent project, right? What will you be using this for? That determines if they're going to have a high value in what you deliver or a low value. What do you hope to achieve from this? They may say, well, I hope you build this website so I can make $1 million because I really think I can. Well, they're going to have a little bit more latitude in how they price because they have this dream of $1 million website. Is this the first time you've done this? A lot of times clients don't understand how complex things are, and especially if they've only done it they've never done it before. So you want to ask them, have you ever done a project like this? Have you ever been involved in it? Because if they haven't, then part of your goal is to educate them why it is more complex. How frequently will we communicate? This is true for a lot of jobs out there, because your pricing does vary based on the level of communication expectations the client has. And I'll give you an example. Let's say I want you to do a job. Again, something very simple, right? I want you to design this. I want you to take this design, turn it into an email, give me an HTML. Great. But here's the caveat. I need to talk to you every hour that you're doing it. Wait a minute, what? You mean every hour I'm working on this, you need to be talking to me? Yeah, and that all of a sudden says, well, wait a minute. Now I have to spend even more time talking to them. I have to be delivering on a much faster pace. I'm going to be almost micromanaged in this. If it's somebody wants me to follow those guidelines, I'm going to get paid for it, and I'm not going to charge my base rate. I'm going to charge a little bit more for it. Can I include this in my portfolio? Oh, my word. This one actually is really, really important in a subtle way. Your portfolio matters. We're going to talk about portfolio in another lesson, but you want to make sure that that if it's a big project, especially with a big brand name, that you can tell people about it. And here's why you want to ask that question, because if they say no, then they should pay more. Because if you can put it in your portfolio, then part of the benefit is that you can tell other potential clients you've done work on this. Back to discounting. Sometimes we have discounted a project solely because it was a big marquee client or it was in a space that we wanted to demonstrate expertise in. And we specifically said, we will give you a discount if you allow us to put this in our portfolio, because you're a big brand name and you normally don't do that. Sometimes they'll say, no, you can't tell anyone. If Apple puts a job out there, you cannot disclose you work for Apple, period of discussion. They should pay more because you don't get the benefit of saying, hey, I did something for Apple. Is there legal and regulatory compliance? Again, number 2 from the bottom there. This is a big thing. Back to that email example I kept on referencing. If that email that you come up and design and look at has to go through lots of committees and it has to be reviewed by attorneys and it has to follow certain guidelines, trust me, that becomes a complex project instantly. That's why a lot of people in the tech space love like healthcare, because healthcare has tons of regulation. Financial sites, all of them have legal, regulatory, and or just large groups of people communicating on them. Those type of projects, you should charge a lot more than your base rate because they're more complex. And then finally, do you have systems and processes already set up? I know this is a long list, but let me explain this last one. The reason you ask this one is, again, do they have the mechanisms that allow you to do your job, right? If they don't have, let's say, a Dropbox account, and you're constantly using Dropbox and you got to go set it up for them so they can get the files, that just makes it a more complex project. This is especially true if you're building out, let's say, a website on WordPress. If they don't even have an account with Wix, let's say, or you're building a mobile app or whatever it is, if you have to go and actually create up all of their systems to support the delivery of the work that you're going to do, that is by its nature a complex project, because you're not just building the website. You got to go configure, set it up, and do all these other things, and you're going to need their cooperation. So this is just a really simple list, and there's a lot more, but the goal is ask lots of questions and let them explain to you why this is a much more complex project. Okay, now, there's a big caveat to complex projects. There is a huge amount of risk if you take them on, okay? The reason simple projects are great because the price is lower, you know exactly what you have to deliver. There's not a lot of ambiguity in the process. But complex projects, by their nature, tend to have a lot of ambiguity. Things aren't as well defined. You have to discover them. It takes time. So realize if you are trying to move to a complex project, if you want to get those higher end rates, you're taking on more risk. Can you deliver, the actual project because it's so undefined? Do you actually have the skills and experience? Is there a gap in those? Because you may say, oh, sure, I can do this, but then you get into it and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I don't know how to get this done. And then, of course, clients' expectations change over time, right? So the more you work with them, the more complex it is. They may change the requirements on you. And the only way that we have found to combat any of this is that you're going to have to spend more time communicating. And that means even more time, more, adding to the things that have to be done in that complex project. So while I think complex projects are great and you should be looking for ways to take a simple project or ongoing or anything to move them to complexity, realize there is inherent risk in doing that. Okay, so as you're going through this module, there's really just 5 rates that you have to think about, okay? And just go ahead and take time and write them down. What is your base rate? How much would you charge somebody if it was urgent? What kind of discount would you give to somebody if it was long-term, and what is that length of time? What is a complex project? How much would you really charge for a complex project? And then finally, what is your minimum rate? This is that, bare minimum, like I will not work below this. And everybody will be different, but it's good to know what these are, kind of at the onset and as you are doing work. Now, I'm going to give you finally some strategies around how to set your price. Okay, so there's a couple of different ways of doing this, but one of the strategies that I think works well, especially for new freelancers or for people that are needing work now, is using price to attract your clients. Okay, now, as I said before, whatever you put in that hourly rate on your profile, whatever that rate is, it's going to go up or down for all the factors I've covered already. Now, so what we want to do is we want to get more clients. We're going to set our median rate right around 10% lower. So the median out there that most of our people are charging, we're going to be just a fraction off of what those are. Let's say 10, maybe 20%, but not too much out there. So what do I mean by that? Well, you're looking at discounting to the mean. Okay. So if you take any distribution, there's going to be a point where 50% are higher, 50% are lower. So you see this all the time when you're doing your research on competition. You'll see those different rates out there. You're generally going to want to find your little bucket and find out kind of where that median price is, that right in the middle. And then you're going to want to come a little bit off of it. That's a good way to attract people because they're going to look at you in context to the competition. And most people are at a certain rate. They're going to come in and you're a little bit lower. They may give you a more attention than someone who's just a little bit higher. If nothing else, that if I saw people from $40 to $60, I'll probably look more at the 40 people and compare them to the 60 people and see if there's that big of a difference. But remember, that's just the base rate. That's just the rate that, for a simple minor project, that's not the rate you're going to charge for other things. Okay, now, there's another strategy, which is using your hourly rate to be very selective, okay? Now, by its nature, there are less people on Upwork willing to pay you a high rate than a low rate, okay? Now, the people that are willing to pay you a high rate, though, have very high expectations. They are looking for people who have a high degree of expertise, of specialty. They have a good reputation. And they exist out there. They exist out there. So your goal on these particular people is you want to go ahead and discount to the mean of the highest. In other words, you don't want to be the most expensive and you don't want to be the lowest. You want to be in that 25 percentile, somewhere in the mean of that 25 percentile, so that you can come in and have those discussions with people that are serious about hiring expertise, and they don't want to hire the most expensive person. They don't want to hire the cheapest person. They want to hire the person right in the middle, and that's where you want to be. So in that 80 to 150 range, let's say, it really depends on where you are. So again, be thinking about your pricing strategy at the high end to be attractive, that, hey, I'm expensive, and I may not be as expensive as others. Let's talk about what your needs are, and then using that to start that conversation. Okay, so just to summate, your hourly rate is the start of a pricing discussion. That's all. It's just the start of it. It doesn't really matter, is it $42 or $47? Don't overthink it. It's just, what is my strategy? Do I want to get a lot more work now? Let me discount it off the mean, and I'll go in and pick up maybe some of those jobs, have people contacting me because I want to understand what they need more, or maybe I want to be a little bit higher in, but not too high because I only want to work with very select clients that have the money, and obviously there'll be less of them. So remember, your price is the start of the conversation, not what the actual rate will be. And never be the cheap freelancer. Never be the cheap freelancer. Let me say it again. Never be the cheap freelancer. Never. Why? Because you can never raise your pricing with existing clients once you give them a cheap rate. Never. I don't care what it is. If you are charging $5 an hour for something that legitimately should cost 30, 40, $50 an hour, you will never be able to make up that difference. At best, maybe they'll give you a 10% raise. At best, but they never will do it. Never be the cheapest. You don't have to be the most expensive, and you don't want to necessarily be too low on the spectrum. You kind of want to be in that Goldilocks zone of, I'm good, but I'm a little bit, my hourly rate is a little bit lower than everyone else. Why don't you call me and let's figure out if it's a complex project. So, the last thing in this module, I know it's a lot, thank you for staying with me on this one, is experiment with your hourly rate. There is nothing on your profile that has to stay permanent. And your hourly rate, you can change it just like you change your picture, just like you change your title. You can change your hourly rate at any time. So go ahead, and if you really want to figure out what your pricing should be, then do this experiment. On Monday, set your price at a certain rate. 2 weeks later, discount that price by, let's say, 20% or 10%, whatever, and let that go for 2 weeks. And then 2 weeks later, go ahead and take your base rate and increase it by 20%. In other words, play with pricing. There's no reason not to play with pricing. I mean, it's not going to hurt you in the long run, and it will help you. So go ahead and say, here's what I think I can charge. And all right, I'm going to be a little bit less, or I'm going to be a little bit more. One of the things that I'm most proud of is we had a freelancer from Jamaica who was charging $5 an hour, okay? And through our training, through our discussions, we got him up to $15 an hour easily. And I know he will be able to charge more as he gets more experience and skills. Now, what was the difference between $5 and $15? Well, $10. That's it. His skills were the same. His demeanor, his likability, all the factors that went into it. He just decided to take our advice and raise his price up. Now, the project he got, by the way, he did discount it by just a little bit, by $2 an hour, but they were going to give him a full-time contract for 40 hours a week. So in the end, all the things I'm telling you are proven in practice, and I hope you will use them to make sure you get paid what you're worth.